Donald Trump may be the most expansionist president we've ever had, from retaking Canada to taking over Mexico to retaking the Panama Canal, and then even buying Greenland from Denmark. What is going on? What's his purpose in doing all this? Is he serious, or is it a negotiating tactic? Well, I tend to think that there's a layer of seriousness behind all of these motives, because the fact is that the United States, the most powerful country in the world, can do everything that Trump is currently talking about. Yes, we could make Canada the 51st state. We can invade Mexico to destroy the cartels. We can retake the Panama Canal. We could buy Greenland from Denmark. And all of these kind of picture the current state of the world, where the United States still tends to be doing better than everybody else, even while the United States itself is experiencing issues. Let me tackle each one of these one by one. First of all, let's go for Greenland, which is very simple. Is Trump serious about buying Greenland? Well, I think so. It's a strategic place militarily, geopolitically, because obviously the Arctic Circle has a lot of significance. Not only does it border great countries like Russia, but there's huge natural resources. And yes, we have access to the Arctic Circle via Alaska, but certainly having Greenland would help a lot. But then further, it's just a lot of land mass, and in and of itself, beyond the Arctic Circle, has a lot of natural resources and would be a strategic point on the northeastern border of the North American continent. How would we obtain Greenland? Well, obviously the goal is to buy it from Denmark, but this could be potentially where some of the NATO/EU conversations come into play. Because the reality is, we are returning to a realpolitik world, a very real geopolitical world where diplomacy and raw power are really what matters more than anything else. And the United States is kind of showing initiative in this changing world front, and Trump, who has only one more term and zero concern for the electability of 2028, for example, really can do what he wants. And I think his goal is to leave a legacy, and certainly expanding the United States borders would be a part of that. So we could simply approach Denmark and pressure them economically, whether that's through NATO or through the EU, and potentially try to kick them out of either organization and get other European countries to turn against them and isolate them, all in order to buy something strategic like Greenland. We do something very similar with Panama. The Panama Canal is a very interesting historical example. The reason we gave it away is kind of unclear. I mean, if you go back in history, of course, Panama as a country had riots and kind of had issues with the United States on their land, essentially protesting how much authority we had and control we had over the largest swath of their land. And so we gave it back to them through Jimmy Carter, through the treaty that ended up giving the country Panama full control of the canal in 1999. But the fact is, it is a strategic geopolitical choke point, and it is an economic choke point for the United States. About 73% of all traffic through the Panama Canal comes from the United States. A large amount of traffic in the United States alone, as far as shipping goes through the Panama Canal. And yes, it is true that about 25% of Panama's GDP comes from the canal itself, which, once again, it's their land, but we built it. So Trump's essentially saying, why are we allowing a smaller country that can be easily influenced by, say, China or Russia, to control such a vital American resource? He's making an economic issue. If you look at some of his tweets, he's talking about how the country of Panama charges US shipping too much. So he's making an economic concern, but more than anything, it's a geopolitical concern. Much like the Strait of Malacca would be for China, or the Suez Canal, or Gibraltar. All of these, including the Panama Canal, are strategic choke points that could literally halt global worldwide commerce. But the Panama Canal is specifically for the United States, something that really the US shouldn't relinquish control over. And so that's been a large issue. I mean, even Jimmy Carter faced pushback from that from Ronald Reagan. So I think Trump could take the initiative and simply commandeer the canal under economic security reasons if he so wanted to. What would that look like? Probably just having a few warships stationed outside of Panama. Certainly it would look bad from a PR marketing perspective, but what's going to be interesting to watch about Trump is how much he gets done in those first 2 years, or in just his first year, because to be frank, most Americans don't have a memory beyond 2 months. If he makes all of these decisions within the first 6 months of his presidency, he could get a lot done and still suffer very few repercussions. Now let's talk about Mexico. There's issues with people talking about Trump saying, oh, well, let's see how far into Mexico's border we need to go. Once again, this could be an intimidation tactic, leaking some of these messages to the press. But if they are serious about demolishing these cartels, there will need to be a quote-unquote invasion of Mexico from the United States. That's the only way that we're actually going to be able to take out the cartels, because the Mexican government partners with the cartels. cartels. That is not a conspiracy, that is very well known. In fact, most Mexican elections are frankly run by different people who are front-facing, who have different partnerships with different cartels, and normally every Mexican administration ends up partnering with a different cartel depending on how they win and what deals that they make. So that means that the cartels are so entrenched in Mexican government and Mexican society that you essentially do have to, in a sense, go to war with Mexico and station foreign resources or governmental military resources on Mexican territory in order to actually take them on. But of course, there's a trading aspect to this as well. Certainly, if we have boots on the ground in Mexico, that also gives Trump an upper hand in trade negotiations. There's talks about Mexico retaliating with tariffs. But once again, the fact of the matter is the United States is so incredibly powerful, we can do what we want. We just haven't violated some of these international norms because we try to keep the peace. But as the world is changing and as Trump seems to be very aggressive in having a kind of Monroe-like doctrine where we really focus on the Western Hemisphere and try to get out of the debacles that we've created in the Eastern Hemisphere, certainly a refocus on the Panama Canal, Mexico, and Greenland makes sense in this vein. The last thing I'm going to talk about is obviously the invasion of Canada, which I talked about in a previous video. Are we actually going to invade Canada? No, I think it's similar to a Mexico strategy where this is mostly negotiation. Of course, in my previous video, I talked about how we could fundamentally deconstruct the entire country of Canada. And certainly there's different approaches that we could take, even, taking that to Mexico, for example. But the overall atmosphere is, I have no doubt in my mind that the United States will actually in some way, shape, or form expand its borders under Trump. The man's more concerned about his legacy than anything else. And there is nothing better to kind of promote your legacy than saying the US actually expanded under me. I think the last person to say that would be whoever inducted Alaska and Hawaii as official states. I believe that was 1949. I forget who was president then. Or Teddy Roosevelt. Obviously, Teddy Roosevelt led expansionist activities from the United States. That spirit has kind of left the American psyche, but we might be bringing it back. So all that to say is I'm looking forward to a lot of Trump's kind of planning to see whether these things become practical or are just negotiating tactics for better trade deals. Either way, it's stating that the US has so much leverage that we're simply just not using, that we're going to be able to use these pressure points like the Panama Canal, Greenland, Mexico, Canada to formally get what we want and ensure that the American people are able to prosper.